You can hear it and feel it before you see it. The scrape of oak wood grinding against stone. The longship bumps against the rocks. The keel is sliding on the strange, foggy coast. Men stumble forward, boots sinking into the sand, darker than the shores at home. The air, it smells different. It's thick with pine, sharp and clean, and mixed with something sweeter. The breeze is cool, but it's not biting like the north wind. As the fog dissipates, the lush green land reveals grapes. Vines twisted through the trees like ropes, heavy with clusters. The men hallucinate from hunger and fatigue. They see the grapes hanging on the vines, split open under their own weight, red juice dripping into the dirt like blood. Their mouths water before the first grape is even plucked. A river runs nearby, alive with motion. Salmon leap silver into the air, flashing in the sunlight that has peaked just over the horizon beyond them. For the men raised on the harsh lands of Greenland, this feels like a promise. A land rich with food, soft with soil, full of life. The crew whispers, voices low and unsure. Is this the afterlife? One asks. Valhalla? Another say, naming Odin's hall. The old gods still weigh on their minds. You idiots, we're not dead, shouted another. A close friend of Leif said, well, then this might be Eden. Leif said it was like a garden. Leif Erikson stayed silent. He jumped from the bow, his feet crunched on the rough shore, his cloak snapping in the gentle gale, a simple iron cross glinting on his chest. He didn't argue with the men's assessment, nor did he try to explain. He only stares at the trees, as if reading some message written in the shadows, looking for clues and cautious of what might be lurking. Overhead, a gull circles and cries. The sound rasps like a warning. The men shift nervously, but the grapes are calling. Some men can't resist and begin to harvest them as quickly as they can, eating whole mouthfuls, chewing seed and stem along with the sweet tart meat of the fruit. Grapes fell to the ground as the men consumed their fill. The fallen grapes squished beneath their boots, staining them dark. Leif felt something about the sound of it all. It was soft, too soft. The birds became silent. Leif could tell there was something out there, something watching. The men laughed louder and louder as they embraced the treasure of the land, but the laughter died quickly when they saw Leif's expression and his watchfulness, like he was seeking out a trap set by an army. They saw his vigilance like a commander or a general. Instinctively, they gripped their axes tighter. Land was beautiful, maybe too beautiful, and these Viking explorers knew beauty can hide unexpected danger, then movement. Not in the brush, not in the river. Farther back, deeper than they could see. The men froze, the air grew heavy. There was only waiting, listening, sensing. Someone is here. Is it a Valkyrie? Someone shouted in a whisper. Shh, was the response. Another looked at Leif and said, with a sense of dread, is it the angel with a sword that guards the garden? Is that it? Leif motioned with his hand to calm down and be quiet. Everyone froze in place and just listened. But nothing happened. Nothing was heard until the sound of insects and birds began to call out, like an invitation to continue their indulgence. I've been waiting to tell this one for a while, and I'm excited to share it with you. I love Leif Erikson and his story and his adventures to the west. This one part of his story in particular I've always found fascinating, particularly the fact that a tiny blunder may have derailed the whole mission. There's one thing most people don't consider when they talk about why this Norse settlement never took root. Now, this isn't just history, this is also some legacy, and it's a riddle carved in the edge of the world and written down for us in the sagas. And normally the question would be, did the Vikings really reach America 500 years before Columbus ever set sail? But that's a silly question at this point. So let me say it more like this. The Vikings reached America 500 years before Columbus. The ground itself has revealed proof. Since it's true, why didn't they stay? That's the more important question. Was it the natives and their arrows falling like rain? Was it the journey, the brutal distance, ships struggling across the sea too wide to supply materials or settlers? Was it homesickness, the pull of Greenland's majestic icy shores? Or was it something deeper? Division, greed, the limits of men who dreamed too far. In this episode, we're going to walk through it all and come away with a deeper understanding of Vinland and why it still matters today. Get ready to step onto the shores of Vinland, heavy with grapes and full of promise. We'll gain more insight into a Viking legend named Leif Erikson, quiet, faithful, steady, and his famous sister. She was fierce as fire, and her story deserves her own episode, which will be coming in early 2026. We'll trace the sagas through Newfoundland's turf houses, where archaeologists have found proof that the legends are true. And then we'll face the collapse, the retreat, and the failure to return. Because exploration doesn't always end in conquest. Sometimes it ends in questions. Questions that still echo. What does it mean to discover something you can't keep? Across the Atlantic, from Greenland, Iceland, and the edge of the known world, a trader ended up somewhere he didn't intend and definitely didn't want to stay. His name was Bjarni. He was a simple trader who got caught in a storm. He was blown off course. The North Atlantic fog was thick and he was helpless for a time, a long time. When the sky finally gave way, the fog cleared and the sun returned. He saw land off in the distance. Thick forests, long shores, nothing like the icy coasts of Greenland or the volcanic shores of Iceland. But Bjarni didn't set foot on the land. He was in a race against time. His crew was restless, food rations were low, and his heart was unwilling to risk the unknown. He turned his ship back to Greenland. When they reached land, he didn't hesitate to tell a story of misfortune, discovery, and the possibility of opportunity. Most people mocked him and usually added a quip or two about Hofgufa or drinking too much salt water. People weren't buying the Norse seaman who saw a new land and wasn't willing to set foot on it. That led most people to believe that it was just a little too far-fetched. It couldn't be real, it couldn't be true. But among the listeners was Leif Erikson. He didn't laugh, he listened. He even felt a pull from deep within. Leif was the son of Eric the Red, the outlaw who had carved out a home in Greenland after being cast away from Iceland. His father was bold, quick-tempered, hungry for conquest. Leif, however, was much different. He was quiet, measured, calculated, and to the disappointment of his father, a Christian. In a quiet moment, Leif approached Bjarni to confirm his story and make him an offer to buy his boat. Leif thought that if his ship could make it that far once, it could make it again. Bjarni agreed and sold Leif his ship. Leif put the word out of this ultimate venture, looking for a crew that was willing to risk everything with no guarantee of return. Those that had longed for the days of raiding along the coast thought this was their chance to dare, to be bold, to earn their place in the Great Hall. The crew formed quickly, each man with his own motives and beliefs on what they would find. The send-off for the crew, it was small. Leif's sister told her brother to find the land and to come back and take her there. She said, "If you don't, I'll find you and I'll kill you myself." And he believed her. They hugged and he jumped aboard. The crew took their position, grabbed their oars, and used them to pull the ship from shore out into the surf. In unison, the men pulled. and the vessel headed west on a course of destiny. The voyage was long. The sea was cruel. The North Atlantic is not a gentle partner for such a venture. Waves slammed the longship. Salt spray stung the men's lips. Frost clung to their beards. Timber groaned under the strain. At night, the men huddled together, cloaks stiff with salt, praying the sea would let them see morning, hoping for the wind in their sails to move them forward to their destination. But extended time at sea tests even the strongest mariners. The reality of the sea also has a way of keeping mutiny in check, because failing to work together as one was the quickest way down to the bottom of the ocean. That's why people hunkered down, grit their teeth, and just kept going. Land! Now, before you get too excited, that wasn't it. They didn't find Vinland, not right away. They had no idea what they found, but it definitely wasn't what Bjarni talked about, because there wasn't a single tree in view. They stopped for a moment to examine and to explore. It didn't take long to figure out this was nothing more than a small, godforsaken rock floating in the middle of nowhere. Someone commented, "This would be a good place for a couple mischievous dwarves." Someone chuckled at the joke. If you didn't get it, you want to learn a little bit about the story of the Mead of Poetry. Well, quickly they noted the name of the location, Land of Flat Stones, and they continued on around the island. Even though the barren island wasn't their goal, it had a way of reinvigorating the men to sail on. It didn't take long until they found another land, except this one stirred more than hope. This one, they thought, this is it. And maybe it was. The land was full of dark forests, stretched as far as the eye could see. Timber was precious in Greenland, and here it seemed endless. They called it Markland, the land of forests. Even though the land was full of resources and promise, it wasn't advantageous for a settlement. That's why Leif directed the crew to sail on further. With land in sight, the biggest challenge was over, and the men knew they could row to shore at any time. It was like being back in Norway and navigating the fjords and sailing along the coast with the land just in view. Off in the distance, there appeared more land that stretched as far as the eye could see, faint but endless. They sailed on. The air suddenly felt warmer, softer. Gulls almost sang a song above them, greeting them, inviting them. The closer they rowed along the coast, details emerged. Vines heavy with grapes growing everywhere, wild grain swaying in the wind, salmon swimming in massive schools, countless rivers emptying into the sea. The men shouted in joy, "Vinland, the land of vines." They marked the map, and no one disputed the name. When the ship finally found its shore, it scraped the rough, pebble-filled beach, and the men that were used to scraping by in life and tilling hard ground, this place, it felt like a gift that was too good to be true. They could barely contain themselves. They took their fill of grapes and imagined the wealth of resources minus the bitter, brutal cold of Greenland. They thought, why on earth would anyone ever go back to such a harsh place? Other than to get their families, of course. That being said, the land would soon give them a reason to return. It was such a good reason that Leif never set foot in Vinland again. Well, Leif stood on the shore and he envisioned what a settlement would look like, where to set up camp, establish a system of hunting and gathering, delegating tasks for their survival. He had seen his father start from nothing in a land of nothing, and the magic of his father's ability to recruit families to join Greenland. This brand new settlement. Leif knew all he had to do was bring back the grapes and the wheat, along with the testimony of the men. He wasn't sure anyone would even be left in Greenland after they returned with news and proof. Leif thought surely this was his calling. Like the monk had taught him that God had a plan and a purpose for his life, he thought, this is it. This is my calling. His faith had already given him the courage to sail into the unknown, but now it was giving him a sense of purpose. The only thing left was the wisdom and the leadership to steward such a gift. But what happened when expectations didn't live up to the dream that he had? Would Leif crumble? Would he cave, fade into obscurity? The men, they built shelters, they lit fires, they explored further inland. Days stretched into weeks. They cut timber and filled their ships with cargo. They wintered there. It was cold and there was plenty of snow, the occasional storm that brewed off the coast, but it was nothing compared to the last decade of winters in Greenland. They ate well. They were able to fish all winter long, all but 2 weeks. The fires kept up with the cold, and the fuel, it was endless. They slept in houses warmer than they could remember. The comfort, it began to produce a sense of ease. The men, they knew how to work, and that never faded. But the edge of winter, the narrow bridge of winter that they used to have to navigate every year, it became a lot less difficult virtually overnight. But comfort can be dangerous. It can make men forget what waits in the shadows. It can even cause a person to let their guard down and become much, much less vigilant. At night, they began to hear strange sounds, voices carried on the wind, crack of branches. They wondered if maybe spirits walked in the woods or if other men were watching. Some laughed it off. Some mentioned trolls must live here too. Another, in a mead-filled shout, said, "Freydís has come. She's come to kill her brother for not coming back to get her." Freydís, Leif's sister, was just like her father Eric. She wasn't on this voyage, not yet, but her name was never far from his mind. Where Leif was calm, Freydís was fierce. Where Leif weighed his words, Freydís let hers fly like arrows. Where Leif's faith kept him steady, Freydís trusted her own strength. If Leif's presence brought peace, hers would one day bring fire and even division in her own family. For now, she was still far away. But the sagas, they promise this: Vinland's story cannot be told without her. How do we know about Vinland? How can we be so sure that the Norse were the first Europeans in North America? The answer begins in the sagas. Two of the most important texts that you can find are the Saga of the Greenlanders and the Saga of Eric the Red. Both were written down in Iceland centuries after the events, but they tell of voyages west of each of the lands we've touched on so far. The sagas are not always simple. They most definitely mix history with storytelling, memory with myth, legacy, and lore. But when you read them closely, you see that they give details too precise to be inventions. They talk about salmon so plentiful that it seemed endless. They describe forests, grapes, rivers, and coastlines in ways that match real places. They tell of encounters with native people, of trading, of battles, of blood spilled. For many years, people argued about them. Were they legends or were they real? Just like with many ancient documents, given enough time, it's amazing what the earth will eventually reveal. For us, the answer came in 1960, on the northern tip of Newfoundland in Canada. A husband and wife team of archaeologists found something shocking. They uncovered the remains of a turf house. These were not native homes. The style matched Norse buildings in Greenland and Iceland. They found iron nails, a spindle used for spinning thread, and other objects that showed beyond the shadow of a doubt Norse settlements had been here. The sagas were right. You can go there today and you can feel it for yourself. The wind sweeps off the Atlantic coast. The ground is soft and green in summer, white with snow in the winter. The turf walls rise low like humps in the earth. The remnants of these turf houses are there. You can even step inside reconstructed buildings, and you can smell the smoke and the fire, all for yourself. You can see for yourself the outlines of these original houses alongside of their reconstructed counterparts. It's quiet there, but in that quiet, you can almost hear the voices of 1,000 years ago. The clang of iron, the crackle of fire, the talk of men and women who had crossed an entire ocean just to be there. For the Norse, this was paradise compared to Greenland. The sagas describe rivers thick with fish, forests deep and full of timber, game animals waiting in the woods. For people who were used to scraping by in life, with soil hard to till, this sounded like more than survival. It sounded like abundance. And yet, the story does not end in success, because Vinland, as rich as it was, it didn't last. And that brings us to the haunting question, the one the sagas don't fully answer and archaeology can't yet fully explain. If the Vikings found paradise, why did it become a ghost town? At first, things did go well. In fact, the sagas say Norse met native people. The initial meetings were peaceful. The Norse offered cloth, and the natives gladly accepted it like a prize. In return, they received pelts and food. For a moment, it seemed like Vinland might be more than just a dream. It might be home. But peace can unravel quickly when the cord is thin and the blade of an axe touches the thread. I'll tell you a couple possibilities of why this settlement didn't last, and then you can decide which seems most reasonable. Now, one story tells of a bull brought from Greenland. The animal, it would bellow. It was a sound that the locals had never heard. Fear began to spread. The natives, they didn't like this foreign beast. Eventually, the people were overcome with deep disdain for both the animal and their new neighbors. Shortly after came arrows in the dark, ambushes, battles, and both sides suffered tremendous loss. The Norse were brave, but they were few. A handful of Viking settlers faced entire groups of native warriors. They were outnumbered 100 to 1. They fought hard, but every clash pushed them closer to the sea. Distance worked against them too. No hope for reinforcements. This was a logistical nightmare, and Leif knew it. Greenland and Iceland were too far away. Viking longships were fast and strong, but they could not easily carry enough supplies across oceans to wage an endless war. Storm season on the Atlantic made the window for sailing narrow. This was a battle that they couldn't win, and they knew it. That doesn't mean that others wouldn't try. They did, with minimal success, or some might say failure, caused by delusion and visions of grandeur. The sagas do speak of greed and of pride, of arguments that cut deeper than swords. Freydís, Leif's half-sister, would later return to Vinland. Now, there's some debate whether she was his half-sister or full sister. Doesn't matter. Her name is carved into the darkest chapter. She quarreled, she schemed, and she murdered her rivals, her own Norse rivals, with her own axe. Her violence stained the soil red and made even her followers despise her. The dream of Vinland, it was fading. What had looked like a new Eden, it was twisting into a graveyard of hope. The land, it was good. The people, they were strong. But the dream of paradise alone couldn't keep them there. Now, there's another story that they say led to the downfall of this settlement. The sagas, they give us an alternative explanation that might explain why Vinland, for all its beauty, never became home to a permanent Viking settlement. The Norse had been trading peacefully with the locals. One of the things that fascinated the indigenous people were the tools of the Vikings, specifically their weapons. The locals' curiosity may have killed both the cat and any hopes of a Norse village in Canada. One of the locals picked up an iconic-looking Viking-made bearded axe. Now, to the Norsemen, an axe was more than a tool. It was a symbol of survival, both at home and in battle. It split timber for homes, shaped planks for ships, and if needed, hooked and bit into shields in battle. It carried status and even honor to the Viking. But to the locals who lived without iron, the axe was strange, powerful, maybe even dangerous. With a quick swing of the nimble axe, a man was screaming in pain and his arm left hanging limp, blood draining and pooling on the ground next to him. Shocked turned to fear, and they looked at the axe like it was cursed, and they threw it into the sea. The tool that had built Norse farms and felled Norse foes was to him a thing of danger and a thing not to be trusted. But to the man to whom the weapon belonged, it meant something quite different. The Norse saw not only their gift of technology rejected, but an heirloom and symbol of pride. The tribesmen now saw the strangers as reckless, even deadly. They had more of these cursed tools, and who knew what they would do with them? Suspicion grew, trust thinned, and soon the land would not support both groups. For Leif, the quiet leader, maybe this was a warning. No matter how fertile the land, peace could not hold. And just like his faith brought him here to Vinland, he would have to lean on it once again when he decided to return to Greenland once and for all. Just because Leif didn't return didn't mean others didn't try. Leif had a brother, Thorvald. The lure of Vinland was too great to resist. So Thorvald, he set sail for Vinland. And maybe it was because he wanted to be like his father, or one-up his brother, or maybe he was just looking for a better future for his family. Either way, the end was the same. He arrived in Vinland, but he would never return. As fate would have it, he would die from an arrow shot from the tree line. And as for Leif's sister Freydís, fierce and unbending, her story was blood-soaked and violent. She attempted to settle the now legendary land like it was a prize that everyone wanted a crack at. She was as fierce as they come. She had her own men that she led into battle. One battle in particular that's recorded in the sagas says she bore it all, and she did it while she was pregnant. She went into battle with a baby in her womb, but even she, in her temper-fueled rage, couldn't find a way to tame Vinland or its locals. And so the saga leaves us with this line of thought. Vinland had promised them heaven. Instead, it showed them their limits. In the end, the settlements, they didn't last. Within a single generation, Vinland was abandoned. The houses stood quiet and still, empty and unoccupied. The rivers still ran, the forests still stood, but the Norse legacy in North America would have to wait another 600 years before a Scandinavian settlement would again dwell on the other side of the Atlantic. Leif Erikson returned to Greenland. He never sailed west again. His name lives on, and he earned the nickname Leif the Lucky. His story was one of a man who had the courage to venture into the unknown, who dared to do what others scoffed at. Leif Erikson touched the edge of the world as they knew it and lived to tell the tale. And the tale is still being told and still inspiring people 1,000 years later. In a civilization based in oral tradition, the stories would have been told by the men and the women that were there, told to their friends, to their children, and to their grandchildren. At some point, they became tales of skalds told in the firelight. But that's when Vinland started to slip from history into memory, and from memory to myth. Fortunately, influence from the West was able to take and write these oral traditions down into sagas. But there, they still danced on the edge of myth and mystery, and that's why historical accuracy has always been in question. It was the lost settlement of Vinland for a long time, until it wasn't. Vinland's always been more than a lost settlement. It was a symbol. It still is a symbol, a reminder that the sea could be crossed, that the horizon was never the end, that men and women could go further than the maps or the majority suggested. Exploration doesn't always mean conquest. Vinland proves that. Leif Erikson never ruled in America. He never built a city or raised a kingdom there, but he became a Viking Age legend. How? By proving the sea could be crossed, by being bold, by showing resilience and tapping in to the example that he had of his Viking father, who constantly dared to do more and face adversity and challenges in a way that Vikings of the Norse should. He showed that the unknown could be reached, and sometimes that's enough. Sometimes the value of a journey isn't in holding on to or possessing the land, but in proving that the road exists and that anyone can make it if they're willing to give it a go. You may at some point step into the unknown and start something that doesn't last. And maybe you're building something that ends up fading. But if you've shown the way, you've opened the door for others. And every failure, bump in the road, detour, they all teach us life lessons that we can use that are just as valuable as success itself. So hear this, your journey has meaning regardless of the intended results. Your first attempt may fail, your second attempt may fail, a third, fourth. It doesn't mean that it was wasted. The lesson is simple. Never stop exploring, never stop testing, proving, and finding out what you were destined for. The greatest lesson here is the real measure of success isn't in how many treasures we can collect, or claiming the most territory, or living in the biggest castle before we die. It's in refusing to stay stationary, refusing to shrink back when the horizon is daring us to move forward. So move forward, always. Even the smallest step is a step in the right direction. Vinland's legacy was not a story of building a thriving colony. It was more a story of what's possible when people refuse to stay in the safety of their home. And it's a story of men who risked storms, distance, and fear just to see if something more was out there. And here's what I'd like you to take away. Explore. Explore the world. Explore your limits. Explore what's possible. The Vikings remind us of that. The next horizon is always waiting. And maybe it's the next town over. Maybe it's the next state you haven't visited yet. Maybe it's a neighboring country. Or maybe it's just a new way of living. But here's the warning. Not every ship is seaworthy. Some ships can get you out into the water, but not across the ocean. They look strong, but they can't carry you to the other side. If you're going to chase Vinland, you need the right crew, the right captain, and the right vessel. Because the sea will test you, and only the right ship will get you where you long to go and where you are destined to dwell. Here's something I'd like to ask from you. This podcast, it's our Vinland. It's a new shore, a fresh settlement. Right now, it's just a handful of longhouses on the edge of a vast world. Slowly, people are arriving, and it's exciting. And the analytics are saying that they're hanging around when they do come. But for this to have a lasting impact, for this outpost of the Viking lore to grow into a thriving hall of Viking Age culture and inspiration, it takes all of us. It takes you. So if you haven't yet subscribed, if you haven't yet left a review, and if you haven't yet shared this podcast with somebody that you know, please take a moment as soon as this episode concludes and help lift the beam of the next longhouse in this settlement. Realize every new listener is like a ship landing on the beach. Every share is another story told by the fire. We're building this together. And just like Vinland, it won't stand because one person's strength, but because of an entire crew. Spread the word and let's see just how far this Viking voyage can go. And I'll leave you with this. Until next time, be bold, be strong, and awaken the Viking in you.